each time with a different face, a different name, a different setting. I'm here to share the untold stories, the ones that took place behind the lens. These are the stories that have left an indelible mark on me as a storyteller and a witness to history. I am most comfortable telling stories of my experiences while sharing a meal with friends at the dinner table. It creates the perfect atmosphere for sharing memorable moments. As we enjoy our evening together, I'm going to talk to you as we are all gathered around the dinner table. April the 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. That same evening, I went to work for NBC as they were shorthanded. I started out as a radio engineer editing stories for NBC Radio. Then I was switched to a film crew as a courier, moving up to electrician, which was lighting, sound, and finally became a cameraman. The summer of '68, after King was assassinated, was the Poor People's March to Washington. And they had a mule train that started in Mississippi, and it was going up to Washington. And that was the first, quote, outside assignment that I worked on. And the cameraman that I was working with wanted to get a point of view from the mule train, from riding on the train, on the wagon. He did that. I was up there with him. And we told the electrician who had the car that we'll meet you a couple of miles down the road. Well, we go a couple of miles down the road, we get off the wagon train, we're standing on the side of the road. The whole train's gone by. There's nobody there. We're the only two people. He finally shows up. John, his name was John Abraham. John, where did you go? Well, I went back to Batesville. Why did you go to Batesville? Well, I had to go to the bathroom. I said, well, why didn't you go along the side of the road? He said, well, I had to wash my hands. Later on in that campaign, later on in that year, I joined the Wallace campaign, and I was an electrician on that. The campaign plane was a Lockheed Electra. It wasn't very luxurious. Wallace stayed in the best flea bags in the country. And those of us in the press corps, including me, didn't like that. So I was sort of designated as the individual to take a quick look at the hotel. If it doesn't look right, look around for something else so everybody can go over to this other hotel. We stop in Duluth, Minnesota. The bus is on the side of the hotel. I jump off the bus, I go running around to the front of the hotel. I look up and there's George. I get grabbed by a Secret Service agent. George puts his arm around me. He says, oh, he's one of ours. And we go into the lobby and we walk in the lobby. Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. Welcome for coming out. Another hotel that we went to was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And it was a flea bag. And there was nothing that we could do about it. You walk into the lobby and there was a little old lady there on a switchboard, the old kind where you plug the plugs in to make the connections. I went up to my room and I had 2 single beds and a TV. The guy who was the sound man had 3 beds and no TV. And there was a big hallway and so forth. Well, I went and ran an errand or whatever, came back, and he's laying. He had taken a bed out of his room, put it in the hallway, put a lamp next to it, and he's laying in bed. I said, Cosgrove, what are you doing? He said, this is my room. I said, where's your bathroom? He said, down the hall. So anyway, what happened is that after that, the press corps is making all kinds of phone calls at night, calling New York, checking in with everybody. The little old lady at the switchboard had her fill. She pulled all the plugs and walked out. We had a lighting kit that was very big. It was it only had 2 lights in it, but they were large. They were 1,000-watt Mo Richardsons, and it was heavy. And the 3 networks, that's all that there was back then in '68. We rotated carrying that thing to the event at night. But we had good cooperation. We've been on the road for a long time. We get into Seattle, we're in the Hyatt Hotel. We walk in and we see there's a barber shop. And we go running into the barber shop, all our gear on us and everything, said we need a haircut. And a couple other people did also. And we're talking to the barber and said, look, there's a rally tonight. And if you want, there's a whole plane full of people who need a haircut. And if you want to come back after the rally, I'm sure there'll be people here. So we got word back that their boss said, yeah, okay, we'll be glad to, you can do that, keep anything that you make. We got back about 10 o'clock, another throng of people go running into the barbershop and the lines out the door. Those guys cut hair until 3 o'clock in the morning. Now we had a problem with George, and that problem was this. We were filming those days, and film was expensive, and film couldn't be reused. And he just rambled on and on and on. And we said, with his campaign speeches, we said, Governor, you got to do something about that. We can't keep burning this much film. So we go to the next rally, and we're all sitting there on a chair just waiting, And all of a sudden, we hear Wallace say, now you newsmen, you get this. That was our cue. We turned it on. I had the opportunity to photograph, to be present for the launches of Apollo 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, and 16. You will notice that I did not say 13. I wasn't there. You will also notice that Apollo 13, it was the famous quote, Houston, we have a problem. The NASA needed more publicity than what they were getting, because publicity means money. And this time they decided they were going to let us photograph from the gantry as it's walking out, as they're rolling it out to the launch pad. So we get up on the gantry, and I've got a weird kind of acrophobia. Some things bother me, some things don't. But the base of the gantry was 60 feet off the ground. And then we get into the elevator alongside the rocket, and we go up to the 9th level, where is the ingress for the capsule. We're now 520 feet. So we're 520 plus 60. That's 580. And I look down, it's all grading. You can see all the way to the bottom. And I'm just going like, oh Lord, help me here. And then the cameraman I was working with said, I want to get this shot here. There's a little alcove right here. Just step in the little alcove. And I did, and I grabbed hold of the railing, and the railing went like that. And I about died. But I got to say, the view from up there was gorgeous. So Apollo 11 launched and gone to the moon. Well, we got sent to Honduras. While everybody was watching the men walk on the moon, we were sitting in a cantina in Honduras listening to it on a little scratchy radio. We didn't see it until we got back. Hurricane Camille, you may remember, was in '69. We drove from Tampa, cameraman and I drove from Tampa to New Orleans, called the office, and they said, well, you need to be in Gulfport. One mistake that we made during that trip was that we did not take any pictures as we went along to compare with destruction. And that was a mistake. But nowadays you have Google. So Google, you can get pictures of anything that you want. We stopped at a hotel, a motel actually, that was on the water, or just across the street from the water, which was the headquarters of the Sheriff's Department. We figured this has got to be pretty safe. And we got rooms on the 2nd floor. We took all of our equipment out of the car, put it on the 2nd floor in case, for flooding. A couple of hours into the storm, the sheriff comes knocking on the door. Said, we need to go look for survivors. What are you talking about? The first half of the motel is gone. So we went out in the storm and we looked, and there's all of this broken concrete and everything else. Luckily, everyone got out. There were no injuries. Went back to my room. Barometric pressure is lowering, getting lower and lower and lower. And the glass on the window is starting to rattle. I take my mattress and put it up against the window. It wasn't much later where the window blew out, took the mattress with it. The only place I could go to survive, I went and lay down in the bathroom tub. And as I was laying in the tub, I'm looking up, and they had that reinforced concrete ceiling, and it's bouncing up and down. Okay, now you realize this is my first hurricane, and it's a Category 5. So dawn comes, I look out, and there are lights. I go, wow, that wasn't so bad. We still have electricity. And then after my eyes focused, I realized that they were 2 ocean-going freighters that had been washed ashore. Everything was destroyed in that area. Our rental car, took it back to National, said, a little damage in my car. Well, what's the problem? Well, we're missing a front motor. We're missing a rear bumper. All the side windows are gone. The roof is caved in. We do have a windshield, but we had to use a spare tire, and we left that behind. The guy just tore it up, and that tore up the report, and that was it. But we started flying back and forth from New Orleans in a helicopter. And one day the pilot's flying treetop level. And I was sitting next to him, and I said, did you have a bad night? He says, yeah, I did. He says, I'm trying to stay awake. I go, oh, that's lovely. But anyway, there was, you may remember, there was a story about some people in an apartment complex. And the report was that they were having a hurricane party. The apartment complex was destroyed and everyone was killed. That's not exactly the true story. Those people had no place to go. And they were hunkered down in that building, and yes, they were killed. There was another story that was reported that a woman who lived near the beach ended up in a tree a mile from the beach, alive. Those things happen.
I just want to bring in a service. Correct me if I'm wrong. Although Hurricane Camille is a small hurricane by Hugo standards, I still think, if I'm right about this, it still has the highest recorded hurricane winds to land on the coast of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's most powerful in terms of wind strength
Yeah.
of any hurricane, even to this day, is my knowledge. I just want to bring that up because it was bad. All right. Thanks.
The one thing that I noticed about the aftermath of Hurricane Camille, everything was destroyed except the telephone booth. All up and down the road, telephone booths. Unfortunately, they didn't work, but they were still standing. Camera crews were on call 24/7, 365. Communication was not as instantaneous as it is now. I told my wife-to-be, Diane, I could get a week off in the middle of July if she would like to get married. I really wasn't a romantic. She agreed, and because of where I was, I left a number with NBC. I got called after the wedding before we left on the honeymoon, asking if I'd like to go cover a hurricane. I reminded NBC of the marriage and the time off. There was the reply was, we just thought we'd ask. After that, we were carrying a pager, and the joke between Diane and I was every time that she saw a payphone, she asked me if I wanted to go call in. During the first 6 months we were married, I was gone 4 months, off and on. I was at the William Calley trial in Fort Benning, Georgia. We'd sit outside the courtroom and photograph people going in and out. I mean, I was there, I made money, it was boring. But the interesting thing happened. The correspondent, who was Bob Goralski, was able to secure an interview with William Calley in his apartment. And so we're packing our gear up, and we're going to go to Callie's apartment. And Joe Holloway, who some of you may know of, AP photographer, yells at me and says, "Hey, Alan, can I go with you?" I go, "Yeah, sure, Joe, come on, get in the car." So we get down to the apartment, and Joe says, "Can I use your lights?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll light it for you." And then he looks, and all he had was his camera. He didn't have his camera bag, and he said, "I don't have any film." And he asked Callie, he said, "Do you have a roll of film?" And Callie did. And Joe took the picture of Callie in civilian clothes, leaning up against the mantle with a poster that said, "Make love, not war." That was a Pulitzer nominee. So I'm glad I was able to do my part, Joe, to get that. My first camera assignment, film camera assignment, was with a correspondent. I was working vacation. They were promoting me, getting me on up, with Don Harris. Don was a well-known correspondent out of California. The story was across Florida Barge Canal. We started out in Tampa very early in the morning, like 4 or 5 o'clock. And we went across the state of Florida, photographing as we went. And when we got to Jacksonville, the film was all given to the station for them to process. Later that night, Harris calls me and says, "You better check your equipment. Everything you have shot is overexposed." And I'm thinking to myself, there goes my career. But I'm looking, I had 2 spectrometers, they matched. I had a Minolta spot meter, they matched. The only thing is, maybe the lens was off or whatever. So we trudged on. Now, one thing that did kind of come out was his stand-up. We trudged on and we went over to Tallahassee for the hearing in the legislature about what to do with the canal. Guy comes up to me and he says, "I'm really sorry about what happened." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I processed your film last night and I was 2 stops hot on the developer." And I said, "That make it overexposed?" He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Here's Don Harris's room number, you call him." And he did, and the guy put Harris on the phone with me and he said, "Drinks are on me. Just go down to the bar and whatever you like." We switched to videotape. It was also called electronic journalism. I enjoyed that due to my electronics background and in audio knowledge. The equipment was new, it was heavy, and it was subject to failure. New York brought a videotape editor down to Atlanta to take care of the editing because none of us down there had done it. He was a New York videotape editor, Bob Bailey. And we had a rack in the office where we would feed our stories to New York. And we're feeding the story to New York, and those of us in the office are gathered around because this is something new, we're learning. And the New York engineering department says to Bob, "Your chroma's too hot. Adjust your chroma." And Bob put the phone on mute and he said, "Watch this." And he goes, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "How's that, New York?" "Oh, that's much better." He didn't touch a thing. I was, another time I was to go on vacation, in 1977, they called me, "Do you want to cancel your vacation?" And I said, "What are you offering?" And they said, "A trip to Israel for the Begin-Sadat peace accord." And I said, "Of course I'll go." Well, I was carrying a tape machine back then. It was big, it was bulky. We land in Tel Aviv, I get off the plane and I'm carrying this thing, Cameraman's got his camera. All of a sudden, 2 Israeli security guards come with me. I go, "What's going on?" And they said, "Get in the van." And I got in the van and they go, what is that? And I started explaining to him what it is. And I said, here, let me show you how it works. Don't touch it. So I was eventually able to convince him what it was. And we spent our time in Israel. We had the opportunity, we were one of the camera crews that did the Begin Sadat and John Chancellor interview. When we weren't working, because they wanted to keep the electronic people there, because they didn't have that in Israel. We were in Israel for 30 days. We were able to do the tours. We had a guide. We had a limo and a guide, a stretch limo. And we went on the Jewish tour and the Baptist tour and the Methodist tour and the Catholic tour and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. We got them all. But one day we were supposed to, we had planned to have lunch in a restaurant in Jerusalem. And the office calls, said, we need you to go shoot something. Lunch went out the window, but literally, unfortunately, when we were supposed to be there, that restaurant was bombed. We flew directly from Tel Aviv to Egypt. Because of the peace accord, that was the first time that we were ever able, anyone was ever able to go from Tel Aviv to Egypt. I had one of the first passports that has Israel on one side and Egypt on the facing page. Came home back way of Athens. We had a 4-hour layover in Athens, and what do? You run out to the cab line. Anybody speak English? Yeah, okay. 4 hours. Kodak tour. Let's go. And that's what we did. I went on a Carter trip to Europe and Asia. I was paired with John Poremski, who was a cameraman out of Miami. John was one of my mentors. Earl Wells, who was the film cameraman, was the other mentor. He taught me a lot. And John told me, he said, when we get to Poland, which is the first stop, there's a rally, and he said that you're not going to hear anything. He said the silence is going to be deafening. And we did. We got there, and we're photographing, and Carter's speaking. You don't hear a word out of the crowd. But the one thing that was good for John is, he being Polish, his mother still lived there. So afterwards, he went and visited his mother, was able to give her some money. Most of the time on this trip, we were pool camera, which meant that we represented all the other video cameras that were on the trip. The stuff that we shot was distributed after it was edited or whatever. So anyway, the other thing that they have is adverse pool. Because as I mentioned earlier, equipment was not real dependable at that time. We're in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and our tech manager says to me, or says to John and I, CBS's pool, you're going to the hotel when we arrived. Now in Riyadh, when I was filling out my visa, the company asked me if I would mind not putting my religion down. And I said that I didn't mind, I just want to go on the trip. So John's telling me that Jim Cummings, the NBC correspondent who's been there for about 2 weeks, hadn't had a drink, probably would love to have a drink. And he said, here's a bottle of vodka, I got a bottle of bourbon, and we'll just put them in our run bags and go. Well, every time that we were pool and we went to the palace or the residence of the leader of the country, they went through our run bags, they went through everything. And we're walking down the stairs, and Tom Walzine comes up and says, you guys are going to be pool. CBS has declared adverse pool. So I'm standing there on the tarmac, and I'm thinking, I got a fifth of liquor in my bag. You know, I'm thinking, okay, so I got a fifth of liquor, I'm Jewish, how do I get out of here? So I figure, okay, when I get caught, I'll have the Secret Service arrest me and throw me out of the country. But anyway, we went into the palace of the ruler. There was no check. There was no bag check. And I was just flabbergasted. But every time we would move to a different location, we put our bag down, it went clunk on the marble. Clunk. So finally we got out of there, got to the hotel. ran into Cummings and said, hey, you know, you haven't had a drink. Guess what we brought for you? And he goes, you know, guys, I haven't had a drink in 2 weeks and I feel great. He says, I don't want anything. So we took him back out of the country. When I was promoted to full cameraman in 1978, we had the same routine, 24/7, 365. The only difference was we were traveling with extra equipment. Travel with 18 cases, probably 1,000 pounds. We had to be ready for everything. We had to be ready for whatever assignment there was, whether we had to go live, whether we had to go tape. At this point, I'd like to take a moment that Mike had asked that we take a break. Do you want to do that, or you want to keep going?
Up to you.
Well, all right, keep going. I got it.
Little 5, 10 minutes most.
Okay. I got a call. So we're traveling with all this stuff, and the agreement was we were free to go anywhere we wanted to in town, to do whatever we want, as long as we could make it to the airport within 2 hours of flight time, which is a nice gig. I get a call, and they say, we need you to go to St. Simon. And I go, well, my wife has got a due date that's coming up. And they said, yes, but Carter's going to go out fishing, and we have a Tyler mount, and you know how to operate a Tyler mount, which takes the waves out of the picture. So the producer says to me, look, if your wife goes into labor, we'll send you home. Yeah, you know how that's going to work, right? So anyway, every morning we come down to the lobby for breakfast, and then Jim would ask me, "Your wife's still pregnant?" So luckily she was late and made the assignment and got home. I was assigned to cover Ronald Reagan's first campaign trip after he announced for president. It was 1979. In 1980, I started doing political coverage assignments. I loved doing political coverage assignments. These were when they were civilized, where they would start on January the 1 of election year, and we would fly to Des Moines, Iowa. And from Des Moines, we would go on through all the different primaries and do the different stories of politics. I'd come home in June, which is fine. And then be home for a little bit, go to the conventions, photograph the conventions. After that, then we go on the road for the general election. I loved it because I didn't have to think. I just shot whatever we were told to shoot. The only downside to covering politics was I didn't get any frequent flyer points. One Sunday I got a phone call. Hey, Alan, I got an assignment for you. I was at home. Yeah, what's up? You're going to go on the Jesse Jackson campaign. And I go, really? And they said, yeah, we're going to have you 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Okay, that can't be too bad. So we fly into Tallahassee, join up with the campaign. We're standing outside the church where he's speaking. And one of the Secret Service agents, the guy who drives the follow-up car that follows the limousine. I mean, most of the time with these Secret Service agents, they're quiet. They don't say much. And I wish I could remember his name, but my God, he was telling jokes, he was kidding, everywhere we would go. And he comes up to me and he asks, do you have a bulletproof vest? And I go, no, do I need one? And he said, yes. And I said, is this by someone who can carry this out? And he said, yes. And I said, I'll have it tomorrow. Now, one thing that you may notice in covering the press, with press covering a president or a dignitary, the Secret Service surround them, and the press is on the outside. That's not the way it was with Jesse Jackson. The press was the circle around Jesse, and the Secret Service were on the outside of that. So any shootings, bombings, or whatever, we're the first to go. The other thing about Jesse was he was never on time. We never knew when he was going to do anything. So what we did was, the whole press corps, entire press corps, we all went out and we bought British bobby whistles. And we carried those. And if something happened and somebody got an inkling that there was something going on, somebody would blow the whistle. And then it just kept on and on and on, and we would get together. There was no food with Jesse. We never really got to eat. And when we went to Louisiana, he was making some stops around the state, and as usual, I was pool camera. Well, it was a little bitty prop plane, and there was no food. Get back into Baton Rouge that night, and the producer said, you know, how's it going? What do you need? I said, John, I'd really like something to eat. He asked me, this was in the hotel. He asked me, he said, how do you like the steak cooked? I said, medium rare. He said, okay, we'll call you. He said, just go set up. So I go set up, and I mean, Jesse knows all of us because we didn't travel with him. So I set up, and I'm shooting him and everything, and hotel worker comes up to me, a server, and he says, your dinner's ready. Okay. Take the camera off the tripod. We unplug the audio cable, collapse my tripod. Jesse's looking at me like this, and I go, hi. So Jesse traveled in a Lockheed Electra, and it was a very old Lockheed Electra. We finally called the pilot, co-pilot crash and burn, and it was an interesting plane. We're flying from Louisiana. We're going to go to Dallas, and the flight engineer comes back and says, you need to secure everything. We're going to be going through a storm. And I said, we don't need to go through the storm. And he said, well, yes, you do. Yes, we do. And I wasn't going to argue with him, but my roommate at one time before I got married was an air traffic controller. So I knew a little bit about it. And we start flying, and the pilot comes on. And I couldn't believe this. He goes, here we go. And I'm going, oh my God, you know. And we get into it, and we'll hit these vacuums, and the propellers would just spin. You just hear them, whee, you know. And it was like that. On one bump that we had, Secret Service Uzi went flying out of the overhead. There was a CBS cameraman, Aubrey Marks, who was on the trip. Now, Aubrey was obese, and they didn't have seatbelt extensions back then, or they didn't have one on this flight. So on one of the bumps, Audrey's on the floor, out of his seat. And on another one, he's put back into his seat. So there was a flight attendant. I was sitting next to the press Secret Service agent. He had a transistor radio. He's listening to the guy on the ground talking about chasing tornadoes. And we're up here flying in tornadoes. There was a flight attendant who sat behind us at the exit door, and we used to call her the drill sergeant. I mean, everything had to, this is a press plane. Everything had to be perfect. You had to have your seatbelt. You had fastened. Your tray table had to be up. Everything had to be stored. You know, she was just by the book. I turned around and looked at her, and tears were just coming down her face. It was that bad. It was that bad of a trip. And we finally, they come on and they say, we're going to get out of this. And I'm thinking, well, it's about time. Took a few minutes, and they got out of it. We went and landed in Dallas. Beautiful sunshiny day. The plane was grounded. Secret Service wouldn't let them fly on it anymore.
I was going to say, again, I could be wrong, but I believe you're very lucky, Alan, because if I'm correct, I think the last flight Betty Holly took and Jim Croce took was on a similar plane. I think it was a Lockheed Electra or something similar. I think that's right. So you're very fortunate.
Well, I am fortunate because subsequently,
that was the last flight ever.
It's fortunate. Well, I don't know if it's the same one.
Betty Holly.
Well, that's true, but it wasn't long thereafter this particular flight crew was flying a charter out of Las Vegas and it did a right turn and right into the ground.
I think
There
it's
wa-
kind of similar plan, actually.
Yeah.
It's a little larger, but it's the same thing.
Covering presidential elections was an assignment that I really enjoyed. And I worked on every presidential election from 1968 to 2008. In 1992, I was sent to Houston, to the campaign hotel for George Bush, the first George Bush. And what we did in live TV, which I really enjoyed, was we would create our own studios. We would create our own transmission. I mean, it gave us something to do other than shoot pictures every day. Well, they found out that I knew how to put connectors on cables. And they had me sit at a table by the transmission rack, and all the guys would come in, and they'd bring the cable, and they'd say, this one's dedicated for so-and-so, and I'd put either a coax connector or an audio connector on it. And I did it the whole day, until the bureau chief comes by, and she says, your pool camera for election night, don't F up. And that was it. So, I
La
said,
Sala?
okay. Huh?
La Sala?
No,
Morris?
Freedom. So then I go into checking on cables and all. I go into one of the rooms that we're cabling, and the NBC cameraman out of Pittsburgh is there. And he says, hey, I hear you pull camera, election night. I go, yeah. He said, don't F up. Okay. Later on, I went into another room, and the CBS cameraman was there. And Pat O'Dell, he says, hey, I hear you pull camera. I go, yeah. He says, don't F up. So I'm thinking to myself, you know. Oh, and then the tech manager out of Los Angeles comes up to me and says, hey, I hear you pull camera. I go, yeah. He said, what kind of equipment do you want? And I said, well, I need a larger tripod. I need a larger tripod head. He said, okay. And he said, you'll have it tomorrow. So another day goes by, and all this stuff is going through my head. Don't F up, don't F up. And then I get set up on the platform. I'm in communication with the director in New York, and the director says to me, okay, we're going to start a wide shot of Bush coming out, and then you're going to do a push-in to a head and shoulder. I said, fine. And Bush walks out, and I keep thinking, don't F up, don't F up. and the zoom handle on these cameras were very touchy. You had to be very careful. And at first I was like shaking, and I go, oh my God, this could be disastrous. But once I started, I was okay, and it worked out. But that was an interesting experience, and I didn't F up. One thing I was really not fond of covering were hurricanes. Most of the time they came in at night. What bothered me most about hurricanes was the incessant wind noise. Just drove me crazy. The other problem that you had when you're covering hurricanes is keeping the equipment dry. This stuff's electronic. Gets wet, it goes down. I was covering Hurricane Frederick in Mobile, and you try to be careful. There was a portico at the Admiral Sims Hotel, and I stepped out, and I got a shot down the street. I stepped back, and a piece of plywood went right by. I flew into another hurricane on a Learjet with a pilot that I knew, and that we used many times, and it was somewhere in North Carolina. And the storm was coming in, and he told me, he says, Alan, I'm landing. I'm not shutting the engines down. You got 5 minutes to get your gear off, because I'm taking off. And we were able to make that. Hurricane Gordon was also in North Carolina, got sent there. And one thing that I've learned about covering hurricanes, you get on the leeward side of the building and you try and stay safe. And so I'm photographing this house that's at the water's edge, and it's getting slammed by the waves. And I look, and there's a CBS cameraman down on the street along with some spectators. And I'm thinking, that's not the place to be. But in any event, I keep focusing on this house. A big wave comes, wipes the house off, the face, of the land, comes across the street, washes away the CBS cameraman and the other people. Luckily, they were okay, but the cameraman was reaching down underneath the water. He had his lens in one hand and the camera in another hand. He got nothing further. I was fortunate. I got a first place in press photographers contest for that. I had another incident where you just run into these things. We had a correspondent that said, hey, I think it's a great idea. I'm going to ride out the storm with somebody who wants to stay in their house and not evacuate. And I said, well, I hope you have fun. And he said, he was able to find a cameraman that would do it. I mean, I'm not stupid. I may look it, but I'm not stupid. Anyway, the next morning I asked him, how was it? He said, I'll never do that again. Hurricane Andrew came into Louisiana, or came into Miami, then went into Louisiana. We were covered in Louisiana, had to go to Lafayette. We were dog tired. We were just exhausted. And our bureau chief, Frida, made arrangements. She hired a bunch of limo drivers. They drove 2 limousines in which the crew rode in, and then the other drivers drove our equipment trucks. And we went on to Lafayette, up all night, and we're setting up for the Today Show in the morning. Well, we're working with a satellite truck, excuse me, that only has one path out. And the deal was with the Today Show, that's seen by millions and millions of people. We were the first story up. And they're feeding the tape. And the connection is down in front of me. And I hear in my headset multiple times, where's your camera? It's coming. Where's your camera? You'll have it. We're getting close. I know. And then I hear 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and the producer yells out of this building, switch! And I dove down, I switched connectors, 2, 1, we're on the air. We made it. In Baton Rouge, we covered the floods, and we were tired. Yeah, you always get tired. I mean, it's the nature of the business. I went up to a Red Cross truck. I said, can I have a sandwich or something? No, you can't. These are for the people who are suffering. I said, okay. I went up to the Salvation Army truck. I said, is there anything that, you can let me have? What do you want? We got everything. Salvation Army took care of it. There was a tornado in Tennessee. Salvation truck was out there, and I was just talking to the guy, just conversation. Gee, I would sure like a cup of coffee in the morning. Well, what are you talking about? Well, I got to be out here at 5 a.m. And he said, I'll be here. I said, no, you don't have to be here at 5 a.m. No, you want coffee. The crew wants coffee. I'll be here at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he was. And we had our coffee. I went on, I did a little bit with Hurricane Katrina. I was in Mobile, and then I went to Mississippi, and I walked up to a Salvation Army truck guy, and I knew I wasn't going to be there long. And I took all the money out of my pocket, and I gave it to him. It was a couple, $200, $300, I don't know what it was. I said, put this to the best use. So to this day, I don't give to the Red Cross, I give to the Salvation Army. Speaking of flying, many times I flew in a charter aircraft. I'm flying from Huntsville to Atlanta. I have to get onto another assignment. And I'm sitting in the plane. It's just me and my camera. And we're going on. And we take off, we're flying, and the pilot turns around and he says, hey, Alan, you remember me? I go, no. I said, should I? He said, I used to work at Alan's Photography in Northlake with Betty Townley. And I go, and now you're a charter pilot? He says, yeah. And so we're flying along, and the weather conditions was such that the plane's icing up. And I said to him, the obvious, plane's icing up. And he said, well, it's okay, it'll melt when we go down. And I'm saying, are we going down normally, or are we gonna go down? Because ice in an aircraft don't work. Another time I was flying and I was covering a coal mine disaster. We're leaving West Virginia, and we're on a small airport or strip in West Virginia on top of a mountain. And the pilot says, we're a little heavy. We're going to get off the ground, but we'll pick up speed as we go down the side of the mountain. I said, okay, fine. Speaking of live shows, I was working on the Today shows. I thoroughly enjoyed working on the Today Show. John's been on the Today Show. George Paul was the director, and this guy was like neurotic. And but he did the shows. He had plenty of money. He could go anywhere. I mean, Today Show was #1. Well, George taught me a lot about live TV and camera work. But the one thing that George did, and John would know, is that calling cameras was a little bit different for George, because he would say, ready one, take 3, ready 2, take 1. He never gave you any one. You had to be ready at the time. Now for us as camera people, it wasn't that bad. It was the poor technical director who's got their hands on the button as to which one needed to be activated. What George taught me, and Earl Wells, the cameraman, was don't pan for the sake of panning, don't zoom for the sake of zooming, which is very important because very important to know. And we had the prison riot in Atlanta, and I get a guy comes up to me, he's a producer for CBS at the time, and he said, "Your pool camera for the signing." I said, "Okay." He said, the local station ran cabling in, and the communication cable is a little suspect. So if it goes out, you're on your own. And I said, okay, fine. And we go inside the prison. We're given a spot. It was no bigger than an area to put our tripod in. And the tape guy and soundman was underneath the tripod. Right next to us was a room where all the police were. And they said, if this goes south, don't move, you'll get it all. So they have the prisoners, and they have the prison officials, and they're sitting around this table, and I'm photographing it, and I'm listening to New York, telling me what they want and everything, and then less than 5 minutes in, the communication goes out. And then I remember, don't pan unless you have a start and stop spot. Don't zoom for the sake of zooming. And I went through the whole signing ceremony doing that. And then when I got out of that prison, they were pleased with what I did with them, for them. In Stearns, Kentucky, any place in Kentucky, if you're from the next county, you're a foreigner. And we went to Kentucky. There was a shootout at a mine disaster. Not a mine disaster, a minor strike. And you had the miners here, you had the guards of the mine a mile down the road. So the sound man, tape man had just joined up with me, and in those days it was the leisure suits, and he has on a white leisure suit. And we go walking and taking pictures of the miners, and they're spouting off what's wrong, and then we start walking down towards the mine. All of a sudden I hear pop, 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 pop. And I go down on one knee, and Joe, the tape guy, he goes flat-faced in the mud in his white leisure suit. And as I spin around to show the miners, he made air because he said, we're out here in the open. They're shooting all around us. Luckily, we got out of Stearns coal mine and being caught out in danger, being shot at. Another thing, I am of the opinion, and I know because I've counted, that if a cat has 9 lives, I've used up 10. And I mean, I'm very, very fortunate to be here. In '93, there were the floods in St. Louis. I got called on July 4th. I need you to go to St. Louis. All right, fine. How long? Oh, I'll be there a couple of days. Well, I ended up there 5 weeks. And there was a husband and wife who were trying to save their house. And that was our Today Show shot every morning. We go out to there, and the first time we went out there, they're sandbagging and everything, and we're just standing around waiting for the time to pass. And the owner of the house said, well, at least you could help. Yeah. So we did. We started stacking sandbags. And we go back day after day, and the sandbag wall is like 6 feet tall. Mississippi River's right there. And I'm thinking, this doesn't look too safe. And then the wall gets up to 8 feet. And at that point, the authorities said to this couple, you have to give up. You can't stay here any longer. And within hours, the house was gone. Had another incident where we were with a farmer going through his farm. I think he had corn. And he said, when the floods come, there'll be 15 feet of water in this field. He said, how can that be? He said, come back when the water comes in. And we did, and we were in a boat, and the water was 15 feet down. And then the other thing that I did was just every day after the Today Show live shot, I was lucky I had breakfast, and then down the street there was a helicopter waiting for me. And I spent day after day after day in a helicopter shooting stories going up and down the river, looking for stories. There were no drones in those days. You know, drones have put helicopter pilots out of business. But NBC won an Emmy for their coverage of the floods in '93. I was a cameraman on that shoot, and I was awarded an Emmy, which I was very, very pleased with. Thank you. November the 18th, 1978, I got a phone call, 6 o'clock. Yeah, it's the weekend producer. Hey, Alan, yeah. Don Harris, the NBC crew, being killed in Jonestown. Will you go? And I said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. He said, no, we'll call you back. My daughter was 7 months old. You know the story of Jonestown. It is one of the most gut-wrenching stories that I had ever been on, that when we flew in, we were 500 feet, and the stench was just unbelievable. Because, I mean, you've probably been around a dead animal or dead this or that, you know how bad it is. But this is hundreds of people. When we landed, the still cameraman was David Hume Kennerly, and he gave me a towel and some British Sterling cologne, and we went in and we did the story. The story of Jonestown, which I've done before, it takes an hour. I'm not going to do that. I just want to let you know that I was a cameraman who photographed that. When I finally got back to the United States, I didn't talk about it for 10 years. But the one interesting sidebar on that was I was supposed to have Thanksgiving off, my first Thanksgiving off in 8 years. And I was there. And the desk, the great news desk, calls Diane and says, you don't mind if we keep him there, do you? We know he's supposed to have Thanksgiving, but she said, no, that's fine. But the vice president who was there said, you are going to have your Thanksgiving off. And I got sent home. Went back a year after, and there was another cult, the House of Israel. At that one, well, back up to Jonestown, there was an incident, you know, talk about 10 lives. We were flying in a government chopper. They brought in bladder tanks to fill up the chopper after we got to Jonestown and get back. Well, they didn't drain the hoses, and we're flying back. Jet fuel is floating all over the floor in the chopper. And there were some smokers on board. We kept saying, don't smoke, don't smoke. But, and then I went back to the year after anniversary, and there was another cult, Rabbi Washington, and his name was David Hill. He called himself the King of Israel. And we had permission to photograph, well, just like Don Harris and Bob Brown had. They had permission to photograph. We had permission to photograph. We're in his assembly room on the second floor of this building, and he starts ranting and raving about the white people. And they start, kill all the white people. And I look around, and myself, my tape guy, and the reporter, we're the only white people here. So there was an ante room. I start backing out. And he had a guy, some aide or whatever, he had some guy who's dressed up in an English Army uniform. And he said, Sergeant Major. And he hops to, and he says, you know what your orders are, carry out your orders. And I thought, oh shit. And we backed up to the ante room, and I look, and we're on the second floor, there's a concrete wall, it's about 6 feet tall. Figure, okay, we can clear the wall. We'll probably break a bone or something, but at least we won't be killed in this room. But luckily, he calmed them back down again, and we were able to get out of there. Throughout my career, I've been a part of the evolving news industry. The stories and the way we tell them have changed, but the importance of capturing these moments remain the same. As I've shared my stories with you tonight, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for the complex, thrilling, and sometimes heartbreaking world that exists behind the video news camera. These experiences have not only shaped me as a professional, but also as a human being. As you leave here tonight, I hope you have been reminded of the power and the responsibility that comes with being photographers. And I hope the next time that you watch the news, you'll keep in mind that behind every camera, there's a person like me working to bring these stories to life. Now, for your dessert tonight, as I said, I like to talk when I'm having a meal. I am going to use the word retarded, because that is the word that was used in the story. Because years ago, we did a story of a farm in North Georgia that was for mentally handicapped adults. And it was an excellent story. And the owner of this place, he started this farm because his daughter was mentally handicapped. And they had maybe a half a dozen adults there. And they kept it producing. They kept it going. They even were intelligent enough, they played board games and things like that. And the correspondent asked the guy, the owner of the farm, about his thinking on this. And he said, these adults may be retarded, but they're not stupid. I hope that this story had a part in opening the eyes of the world to what these individuals, these mentally handicapped individuals, are capable of doing. We had another story, Christmas in the Mississippi Delta. How do you show Christmas in the Mississippi Delta? There is no Christmas in the Mississippi Delta. The correspondent was able to, and we talked about it, the correspondent was able to find a sharecropper. And we went to this guy's house, and as you can imagine, it was barely standing. The steps were broken to get into the house. There were holes in the walls, there were holes in the floors, there was no window. When I shot the interview with him, I shot it with him against the window, with the window lighting him. And then as the interview is going, I pan the camera up, and there's a rat going across the ceiling. The house was just falling down. Rats were running around everywhere. The story aired on Nightly that night or the next night. An individual in California called Nightly News and said, I want to buy this guy a house. That's his Christmas. I thank you for being my dinner companions tonight, and for following me to share a glimpse of my world behind the lens. Now, who's got the check? It's late. I'll answer questions if you like. Oh, I have no place to go. Yeah, Mike.